I was working the checkout. I was working the checkout counter at a grocery store in Amsterdam when an American tourist walked up with a full cart. She stood there for a solid 30 seconds, looking around confused before finally saying, "Excuse me, where's the line?" I pointed at the 6 people standing in a perfectly organized queue right behind her. She looked back, then at me and said, "But they're not saying anything. How do I know they're actually waiting?" I just stared at her. "Ma'am, that's what a line is. People standing, in order, waiting quietly." She still seemed suspicious, like maybe it was a European trap. Another time, I was at a train station in Berlin when this American family rushed up to platform 3. The dad looked at the digital board, then at his phone, then back at the board. He turned to his wife and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Honey, I think the train's broken. It says it leaves at 14:30. His teenage son looked up from his phone and said, "Dad, that's just 2:30 p.m. The dad shook his head. "No, that can't be right. Trains don't use military time." His son pulled up Google, showed him. The dad still looked betrayed, like the entire European rail system had personally lied to him. My friend who works at a hotel in Paris told me about an American guest who called the front desk at 11 at night. Furious. He said, "Why is everything closed? The stores, the restaurants, everything. Is there some kind of emergency?" She explained that most shops close around 8 or 9 p.m. in residential areas. He said, "That's insane. What if I need something?" She suggested the 24-hour convenience store 2 blocks away. He paused, then said, "But what if I want to buy clothes?" She told him he'd have to wait until morning. He genuinely asked, "Is that legal?" I saw someone at a cafe in Rome try to pay with a €100 note for a €2 espresso. The barista shook her head and said, "No change." The American looked stunned. He said, "What do you mean, no change? You're a business." She just pointed at the small sign that said, "Exact change preferred." He pulled out his phone and started Googling whether that was allowed. Then he asked if they took Venmo. The barista just walked away. These aren't isolated incidents. These are patterns. And if you've ever worked in tourism or lived abroad or just spent time watching Americans navigate the rest of the world, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not that Americans are bad travelers. It's that the assumptions baked into everyday American life don't translate at all. And when those assumptions hit reality, the results are pure comedy. I was on a train from Brussels to Amsterdam, sitting across from this American couple in their 50s. The conductor came by to check tickets. The husband handed over his phone with a screenshot of his booking confirmation. Not a QR code, not a ticket, just a screenshot of an email that said, "Thank you for your purchase." The conductor stared at it, then asked, "Where is your ticket?" The husband said, "That is my ticket. I paid for it." The conductor explained he needed the actual ticket, either printed or in the app. The wife jumped in and said, "We don't do paper anymore. This is 2024. The conductor just sighed and said, "Then open the app." They didn't have the app. They got fined €50. The husband spent the rest of the ride muttering about how, back home, a confirmation email is enough. My cousin works at a car rental place in Dublin. An American customer picked up his rental, walked around the car twice, then came back inside. He said, "I think you gave me the wrong car. The steering wheel's on the wrong side." My cousin said, "No, that's correct. Ireland drives on the left." The guy looked genuinely confused. He said, "But I reserved an automatic." My cousin explained that had nothing to do with which side the wheel was on. The guy stood there for a minute, then asked, "Can I get a different car?" My cousin said no. The guy rented it anyway, then returned it 4 hours later, saying he couldn't adjust. He paid for the full day. A friend who works at a hotel in Barcelona told me about an American family who checked in and immediately asked where the ice machine was. She said they don't have ice machines. The mom looked horrified. She said, "What do you mean? How are we supposed to get ice?" My friend explained they could request ice from room service. The mom said, "But what if we want ice at midnight?" My friend said room service runs until 11. The mom looked at her husband and said, "We should have stayed at a Hilton." They checked out the next morning and left a 1-star review that said, "No ice machine. Europe is behind." I was at a cafe in Copenhagen when an American tourist tried to order coffee to go. The barista said, "We don't do to-go cups." The tourist looked confused. She said, "What do you mean? It's coffee." The barista explained that most cafes in Denmark encourage people to sit and enjoy their drink. The tourist said, "But I'm in a hurry." The barista offered her a ceramic cup she could drink quickly. The tourist said, "I can't walk around with that." The barista agreed. That was the point. The tourist stood there for a minute, visibly frustrated, then ordered it anyway and sat down. She left 10 minutes later and posted on Instagram about how Europe doesn't understand efficiency. Another time, I was at a train station in Vienna when an American guy asked me where the Amtrak counter was. I told him Amtrak is only in the United States. He said, "No, I booked a train ticket. It has to be Amtrak." I explained that in Europe, every country has its own rail system. He looked at his phone and said, "But my app says OBB." I told him that's the Austrian rail company. He seemed annoyed, like I was deliberately making it complicated. He said, "Why can't they just make it simple and call it Amtrak?" I didn't have an answer for that. My friend who works at a pharmacy in London said an American woman came in asking for Tylenol. My friend handed her paracetamol. The woman said, "No, I need Tylenol." My friend explained that paracetamol is the same thing. The woman looked at the box, then back at my friend, and said, "But it doesn't say Tylenol." My friend said, "Because that's a brand name. This is the generic." The woman still seemed doubtful. She asked if it was FDA approved. My friend said, "No, it's approved by the MHRA. This is the UK." The woman bought it, but she Googled it 3 times in the store first. I was at a restaurant in Munich when a group of Americans sat down at the table next to me. The waiter came over and asked if they wanted sparkling or still water. One of them said, "Just tap water is fine." The waiter nodded and brought a bottle of still water. When the bill came, they noticed they'd been charged for the water. One guy called the waiter over and said, "We asked for tap water. This should be free." The waiter explained that in Germany, water isn't automatically free. The guy said, "That's ridiculous. Water is a human right." The waiter said, "Yes, and it costs €2. I was working at a tourist information desk in Edinburgh when an American couple walked up. The husband asked, "How far is London from here?" I told him about 400 miles, roughly a 6-hour train ride. He looked shocked. He said, "Wait, London's not in Scotland." I explained that London is in England. He turned to his wife and said, "Honey, we need to change our plans. I thought it was like a suburb." His wife pulled out her phone, looked at a map, and said, "Oh my God, it's a whole different country." I told her Scotland and England are both part of the UK, but yes, separate countries. She looked betrayed. She said, "Why didn't anyone tell us this?" My friend who teaches English in Prague said one of her American students asked her, "Do you guys celebrate the 4th of July here?" My friend said, "No, that's an American holiday." The student looked confused. She said, "But it's Independence Day. Doesn't everyone celebrate independence?" My friend asked, "Independence from what?" The student said, "From England, obviously." My friend just said, "We're in the Czech Republic." The student paused, then said, "Yeah, but wasn't everyone controlled by England at some point?" My friend decided not to continue that conversation. I was at a museum in Athens when I overheard an American tourist asking a guide, "So, when did Greece get its independence from Italy?" The guide looked stunned. She said, "Greece was never part of Italy." The tourist said, "But all this old stuff looks Roman." The guide explained that Greece was its own ancient civilization long before Rome existed. The tourist seemed skeptical. He said, "But the Colosseum." The guide cut him off and said, "That's in Rome. This is Athens." He still looked confused. He asked if they were the same thing. The guide just walked away. Another time, I was on a walking tour in Amsterdam when an American woman asked the guide, "What language do you speak in Holland?" The guide said, "Dutch." The woman said, "Wait, I thought Holland was in Germany." The guide explained that Holland is another name for the Netherlands, which is its own country. The woman said, "So you're not German?" The guide said no. The woman thought for a moment, then asked, "But you're close to Germany, right? So you probably speak some German?" The guide said some Dutch people do, but the main language is Dutch. The woman nodded, but you could tell she still didn't fully believe it. My cousin, who works at a bookstore in Brussels, told me an American customer asked where the Belgian history section was. She showed him. He picked up a book, flipped through it, then said, "Wait, Belgium is a real country? I thought it was like a city in France." My cousin said, "No, it's a country. We're standing in it." He looked embarrassed, but then tried to recover by saying, "Well, it's pretty small, right? Like the size of Delaware?" My cousin said it's about the size of Maryland. He nodded like that made sense, but then asked, "So do you guys use the euro or French money?" My cousin just said, "The euro is French money, and German money, and Spanish money. It's European money." He bought the book, but left quickly. I was at a cafe in Stockholm when an American tourist asked the barista, "Is Sweden the one with the Alps?" The barista said, "No, that's Switzerland." The tourist said, "Oh, so you're Switzerland." The barista said, "No, I'm Swedish, from Sweden." The tourist squinted and said, "Aren't those the same?" The barista very calmly explained that Sweden is in Scandinavia and Switzerland is in Central Europe. The tourist said, "But they both start with SW." The barista just made her coffee and didn't charge her for the geography lesson. Another time, I was on a train in Poland when an American guy asked me, "Do they speak Russian here?" I told him no, they speak Polish. He said, "But isn't Poland part of Russia?" I explained that Poland is its own country and has been for a long time. He said, "Yeah, but wasn't it part of the Soviet Union?" I said yes, during the Cold War, but it's been independent since 1989. He said, "Okay, but they probably still speak Russian though, right?" I told him some older people might, but the main language is Polish. He nodded, then asked, "Is Polish like Russian?" I said they're both Slavic languages, but very different. He said, "So basically the same." I just put my headphones back on. My friend, who works at a car rental desk in Lisbon, said an American customer asked, "Do you guys speak Spanish here?" She said, "No, we speak Portuguese." He said, "Isn't that the same thing?" She said, "No, they're different languages." He said, "But you're in Spain, right?" She said, "No, this is Portugal." He looked at his phone, zoomed in on the map, then said, "Oh, my bad. I thought Portugal was in Spain." She just processed his rental without another word. I was at a bakery in Vienna when an American tourist asked for a plain bagel with cream cheese. The worker said they don't have bagels. The tourist looked around and said, "But you're a bakery." The worker said yes, but they make Austrian pastries, not bagels. The tourist said, "Can you just make me one?" The worker said no. The tourist sighed and said, "Fine, I'll take a croissant." "But can you toast it?" The worker said they don't toast croissants. The tourist said, "Why not?" The worker just said, "Because we don't." The tourist left without buying anything and told her friend, "This place has no customer service." My friend, who works at a restaurant in Copenhagen, said an American couple finished their meal and waited at the table for 20 minutes. Finally, the man flagged down a waiter and said, "Can we get our check? We've been waiting forever." The waiter said, "You have to ask for it. We don't bring it until you're ready." The man looked annoyed. He said, "That's so inefficient. In the States, they bring it right away. The waiter said, "Yes, but here, we don't rush people." The man said, "We're not being rushed. We're finished." The waiter brought the check. The man left exact change, no tip, and said, "See? We don't need all that waiting around." I was in a grocery store in Germany when an American woman asked a worker where the peanut butter was. He showed her the shelf. She picked up a jar, looked at it, and said, "This is expensive. Do you have a bigger size?" He said that was the biggest size they carry. She said, "Really? In the US, we have like giant tubs." He said, "Yes, but here, we don't eat as much peanut butter." She looked offended. She said, "Peanut butter is a staple." He just said, "Not here." She bought the small jar and muttered, "Europe is so weird." Another time, I was at a train station in Switzerland when an American guy asked me, "Why is everything so expensive here?" I told him Switzerland has a high cost of living. He said, "But a sandwich is like 12 francs. That's insane." I explained that wages are also higher here, so it balances out. He said, "But I'm not making Swiss wages. I'm on vacation." I told him that's just how it is. He said, "Well, it's a ripoff." I didn't argue. I just let him be mad at the sandwich price. My cousin who works at a hotel in Italy said an American guest called the front desk at midnight, angry because someone in the next room was being loud. My cousin said she'd call the room and ask them to quiet down. The guest said, "Why is anyone even awake right now?" My cousin said, "It's midnight. That's not that late." The guest said, "In the States, quiet hours start at 10. My cousin said, "This is Italy. People stay up later." The guest said, "That's ridiculous." My cousin sent security anyway, but the noise was just a couple talking at normal volume. The guest left a bad review about no respect for quiet time. I was at a park in Paris when an American family spread out a full picnic on the grass, complete with a portable speaker playing music. A park attendant came over and asked them to turn it off. The dad said, "Why? We're just enjoying the park." The attendant said, "Because other people are here, and it's disruptive." The dad said, "It's not even that loud." The attendant said, "It doesn't matter. No speakers." The dad turned it off but kept saying, "This would never happen in the US." His wife agreed. They packed up 10 minutes later. My friend who works at a cinema in London said an American group came in with bags of snacks from outside. She told them they couldn't bring outside food in. One of them said, "Why not? We paid for tickets." She explained it's cinema policy. He said, "That's a scam. You just want us to buy your overpriced candy." She said, "Yes, that's how cinemas make money." He said, "In the US, nobody checks." She said, "This isn't the US." They threw the snacks away and complained the whole time in line. I was on a bus in Oslo when an American woman got on and asked the driver, "Do you take dollars?" The driver said no, only Norwegian kroner or card. She said, "But I only have dollars." The driver said she could pay by card. She said, "I don't want to get foreign transaction fees." The driver said, "Then you need to get kroner." She asked where. He pointed to an ATM across the street. She got off the bus, visibly annoyed, and I watched her stand at the ATM for 5 minutes trying to figure it out. Another time, I was at a cafe in Amsterdam when an American guy ordered a coffee and asked, "Can I get a refill?" The barista said, "A refill?" He said, "Yeah, free refills." She said, "No, you have to pay for another coffee." He looked stunned. He said, "Seriously? In the US, refills are always free." She said, "This is Amsterdam. Nothing is free." He paid for a second coffee, but told his friend, "I can't believe they charge for refills. That's so cheap." I was at a train station in Madrid, sitting on a bench, when an American family rushed past me toward the platform. The dad was yelling, "We're going to miss it!" even though the train wasn't leaving for another 10 minutes. They got to the platform, out of breath, and the mom looked at the board. She turned to her husband and said, "It says Quince 30. What time is that?" The dad pulled out his phone, did the math, and said, 3:30. We're fine. The mom looked annoyed. She said, why do they make it so confusing? Their teenage daughter, without looking up from her phone, said, it's not confusing. You just subtract 12. The mom said, well, nobody told us that. The daughter just sighed. That's the thing about these stories. They're not about Americans being bad people. They're not even about Americans being bad travelers. They're about the gap between what feels normal to you and what actually is normal everywhere else. And when you grow up in a country where free refills, 24-hour stores, and tipping culture are just the way things work, it's genuinely shocking to find out the rest of the world doesn't operate that way. It's not ignorance. It's just assumption. The assumption that your normal is everyone's normal. But here's what makes it funny. It's not the confusion itself, it's the doubling down. It's the insistence that the way things work back home is the right way, and everyone else is doing it wrong. It's the American tourist in Rome saying, this would never fly in the States, as if that matters in Italy. It's the guy in Switzerland mad at sandwich prices, like the entire country was supposed to check with him first. It's the family in Denmark upset about store hours, as if they personally wrote the laws of commerce. And look, every country has tourists who do this. I'm sure there are plenty of stories about Europeans abroad being equally baffled by American customs. But there's something specific about the confidence, the unshakable belief that the rest of the world is just a slightly inconvenient version of home. That if you complain loud enough, maybe they'll bring out the ice machine. These stories never stop. I have a folder on my phone full of messages from friends who work in tourism. Every month someone sends me a new one. A new map fail. A new tipping confusion. A new moment where someone asked, but don't you have Walmart here? And every time, I think this is it. This is the peak. And then someone asks a museum guide in Egypt if they take dollars,